If you like, daar was het.
Ja, was het. Muito bem.
Já fiz lá e ali no coração. Não é coração. Ainda não comecei a ver, mas já gosto.
Essa foi a conoces.
Alguém tem o microfone ligado?
Quê?
Alguém tem o microfone ligado? Deixa-me ver o que está a ver.
Welcome everybody on this beautiful Wednesday, 1 of June 2022. We are having the last session of this beautiful webinar, The Future Design of Streets, edition 2022, with beautiful guests today, interesting guests, and I think also a kind of reflecting session, I hope, learning from yesterday. That is the title today, about the reflecting of streets of yesterday, but of course looking also forward to the future of the streets itself. This webinar is organized by 3 universities from Portugal, the Portugalense University Architecture and Urbanismo, Universidade de Minho, Guimarães, Escola de Arquitetura, and the University of Porto, the Faculty of Architecture. We do that with a complete team with different persons that's supporting this. So thank you very much for you. Why are we organizing actually this webinar, The Future Design of Streets? Streets are one of the most fundamental, essential places in cities, urban environment, where people can meet, where they can do all kinds of activities, social, sustainable, green areas, but also mobility, of course. 3 top issues, and sometimes it's completely disbalanced. So how can we learn from yesterday and projecting to improve these streets that are so common and so essential for all of us? And of course, the actual periods of COVID, but also long before that, address us to rethink about the streets and repositioning. Today, we are talking about yesterday. And we do that with Vitor Oliveira. Thank you. He's, besides professor at various universities, as an author of courses, more than 10 universities inside Portugal, but also outside Portugal. He's also the president of the International Seminar of Urban Forum, let's say international point, but also from the Portuguese language network of urban morphology. Thank you, Victor, to be today with us. Architect, but also mainly a researcher, what I have understood. He will unfold as first speaker something about the past, but hopefully also about the future. Our second speaker is Conrad Kickert. He's the one that lived once in Europe, but is on the other side of the Atlantic in Buffalo City, a researcher and a professor, assistant professor at the Department of Architecture, School of Architecture and Planning, University in Buffalo. And what I understood is that he is mainly in studying the researching the urban form between urban life, urban economy, but also how this evolved in time. So we are really looking forward for your story and your presentation to see also what's happened in a long time. Last but not least, Andrea Garcia from Portugal. She is architect, curator, editor, university professor. So a lot of things to do. Has a quite ample and broad spectrum on architecture, but also on city, and reflects a lot of time in this matter, also on the past, but also looking forward. Linked with the CIAUT and the UBI University, and has also is founder of Architecture Affairs Studios and has an architecture gallery. So a lot of perspective to show here with us and reflect on this theme. That is my short introductions about, let's say, the importance of streets and why we are still talking about it today with this guest. And I would like to present or ask Vitor to start his presentation and show his slides with us. Vitor, the floor is on yours.
Thank you, Daniel. It's a pleasure to be with you and Conrad and Andrea today. I will start sharing my PowerPoint. I assume that you see it already?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so learning from yesterday, I will try to, in this very short period of time, I will try to address some aspects of streets that that were lost in time, particularly over the last 20th century, and that, in my opinion, should be recovered when we design, when we plan streets. The first part of this 10 minutes will be more focused on structural aspects, and later, next to minute 10, I will try to go to more particular things. So over the 20th century, we have started to introduce structural changes in the way we build our cities, in the way how we organize our territories. One of the most fundamental changes was that we started to produce street systems that were increasingly fragmented. And this has many impacts. And one that is particularly relevant is that these street systems become less suited for the implementation of effective public transportation. So here you see just two images from Porto metropolitan area. They are at the same scale, approximately, and you can see how different is the way how we started to produce streets in the 20th century. Another structural change was that our street blocks become larger and larger and larger. Obviously, street blocks are intimately related with streets, and the change can be as dramatic as this. Again, we are in the metropolitan area of Porto, and you see one image is on the historical center of Matosinhos, and more particularly of Lessa, and you see how approximately 50 street blocks of Lessa occupy almost the same area of one street block that we have produced recently for an exhibition area. So there is a dramatic change of scale, the scale of things, the distances that we have to walk or to drive, to navigate in our streets. A third fundamental change is about plots. We started to produce plots that are also increasingly larger. And for me, more important than the area of the plot is the surface of contact with street, the width of the plot. So we've started to produce plots that have an increasingly wide of their form. So again, I'm using the metropolitan area. Again, Matosinhos, you can see how two street blocks of more or less the same size can be divided into many plots, be around 50, or it could be just 1 or 2 or 3. And as you can imagine, for someone who navigates in these streets, the difference is very high. One thing that when we discuss plots, one thing that is usually used as an argument is that we need more space. Those plots that were suited for the past are not suited for the present. And we could have here some 2 or 3 very good examples around the world. I choose New York. I'm sure you all are familiar with the New York plan of 1811, when around 2,000 street blocks were designed. And one of the most incredible things of this layout that was designed in the early 19th century is this very small, very narrow plot of between 6 to 7.5 meters wide. And what is incredible for our conversation today is that most of these plots are still there, more than 2,000 years past. So for instance, here we can look at this place because we have the insurance plan with a very high detail, and you can see that in almost in the mid 19th century we had 561 plots, and today 375 of these plots still remain. So the narrow plot is adequate for a dynamic city. The fourth structural aspect that I would like to bring to our discussion is the setback of buildings. Over the 20th century, we started to set back our buildings. Our buildings become increasingly detached from the street. And here again, Porto, now I'm focusing just on the city, and the map shows in black those streets where the buildings are facing the street, and in gray the streets where buildings set back from the street. And of course, if we started to see when the streets were built, black is the past and gray is the recent past or present. So here, just to show very rapidly how buildings started to get detached and how doors started to disappear from the facade. And of course, the next step would be the setback of buildings. Why did this happen? Many things have justified these changes: a growing population, increasing use of private car, the emergence of real estate, and of course, the models that we architects and planners proposed. Why is this important? Because of urban form, of course, but not only for that, because these structural changes have an impact on the socioeconomic diversity and on the environmental sustainability. I have to fly into my last slides, otherwise I would show you in detail how this happens, for instance, in some parts of Porto, how this impact on the social, economic, and environmental aspects happens in Porto. But I would like to conclude with some other issues that for me would be crucial to recover in the design of streets. First, the relation between building height and street width, not in a simplistic view of what is the maximum height of the buildings. Should this be equal to the street wide? No, this is very simplistic. Planning has addressed this issue in a very simplistic way, but I think that this deserves our attention. Another important thing, the presence of doors along the street. We can have this diversity that you can see in the upper slide, or you can have a whole street block without plots, without doors. Of course, that windows are also important, and this building has windows, but the presence of doors is something absolutely crucial. As it is the presence of trees. Here you see Matosinhos, you see this part of the street, you can see by this left image, the buildings are not particularly attractive, but the presence of trees makes the whole difference. And of course, more important than that is that all these streets with trees, they are part of a system that now and then is transformed into a public garden. So this is another very important aspect. And to conclude in the 10 minutes, land uses. This is obviously an issue that should be dealt at the micro scale, at the plot scale, but also at the macro scale. Again, as in the case of the dimension of plots, many people argue that these large infrastructures, these large public services that we need today, they do not fit with the street systems of the past. And I would like to bring that is true in the case of Porto, in the case of our university. But for instance, if we look at New York and if we look at Columbia University, which I think it's one of the best examples of how to introduce a huge complex of buildings into a street system that is very rigid. So, Danielle, I think I have reached the 11th minute, so I'm going to stop and give the word to you or to Conrad.
Thank you, Victor, for sharing your ideas and a really overview of all kinds of aspects that we certainly are going to tackle. Perhaps a question for you that you can answer later, but I think a lot of issues of what you mentioned, I think they are known by a lot of people as a kind of failure. And the issue is always that the regulation somehow, it is also a kind of fight, but maybe we can just address this question and when came back later on it. Conrad, I would like to invite you to start your presentation and share your ideas with us.
Good. I hope everyone can see this. So welcome everyone. It works, right? So welcome everyone. I want to follow up on Vitor's excellent presentation, and no better way to set up than to talk about streets and frontages, the relationship between buildings and public space. I will also not necessarily be talking about street design. I will be talking about the buildings that feed the streets. You have seen months of excellent presentations on vibrant public space. You have seen normative theories. You've seen perhaps empirical theories on what makes for interesting public space. You have seen, for example, a lot of presentations on public space as a place for encounter, talking about the surfaces, the people, as public space should be. I want to talk about how vibrant public space inherently is fed by architecture. And specifically, I want to talk about how this vibrant public space is fed by architecture, mostly at the ground level. We are horizontal vision beings, as Danish architect Jan Gehl has rightfully recognized. These are the spaces that meet, where buildings meet public space. We see mostly the ground floor or the first floor of buildings, depending on the country where you are from. But this is also the silos, architecture, engineering, traffic design, traffic engineering, where you know, the ground floor of buildings has fallen between the cracks of the disciplines. And as Vitor has very well mentioned, we have seen a tremendous amount of deterioration between the relationship of buildings and public space. Here I show two images of the city that I will be presenting to you today, Den Haag, or The Hague, which is the city that I grew up in, a coastal city in the Netherlands. We see the very same little canal filled in, but still very lively in 1915, and then the same place in 2001. What on earth has happened? I do not want to talk about the merit of active ground floors. I hope that we can all agree that they matter. I specifically want to answer Danielle's question, what happened and why? And this is the topic of research I've done over the past decade or so, talking about the erosion of the relation between buildings and public space. Leads to a fun diagram that I do not have the full 10 minutes to fully describe, but in a nutshell, it has to do with three main things: the evolution of our urban economy and our urban technology, the consolidation of buildings into larger plots for higher density, and the introversion of buildings, which has led to decreased contact between them and public space. If you follow this beautiful diagram, you also see it's a self-contagious process. Once you set this wonderful machine in motion, it will not stop until you've reached a very, very low point. What I want to show you as an architect is a set of Nolly maps of two sets of blocks in The Hague, and I want to take you very quickly through a 100-year period of time where I show you what the relation between buildings and public space is. Here we are in that first image, the Voldersgracht, in a most central block in the city of The Hague. Imagine the most central block having a tremendous wealth in the early 20th century of retail, small-scale buildings, commercial activity, street life. However, we see the early evolution partially of technology, partially of industrial revolution, partially of retailing systems as the growth of early department stores, which started to buy up 2-3 buildings and started to open up buildings much larger, being able to sell more and more industrial products. We see also the evolution of technology, the streetcar and the early automobile coming to the city of The Hague, and the municipality deciding to cut new roads through the city to make way for these new technologies, to make sure that the city keeps flowing as well. And in rapid conjunction with that, the evolution of technology, again, the evolution of retailing, the evolution of architecture along these new streets, seeing an entirely new scale of buildings. This is the Netherlands' largest department store in the 1920s, the Bijenkorf department store constructed in The Hague. We see also an evolution of architecture, right? A new relation between buildings and public space, plate glass windows, drawing people into buildings, extending the street from the exterior into the interior, allowing you to see new products during the daytime and at night when buildings and shops were closed. So the same block now in 1937 seen a tremendous amount of consolidation, buying up much smaller parcels to build these much larger department stores. So for instance, here we have the Vroom and Dreesman department store, to the left, the 1920s edition, and to the right, the 1960s edition. Again, the largest department store in the Netherlands, as it was constructed in 1961, parking on the roof, and the street level was just to get into the store, and seeing a whole new relation to the streets as a funnel into these store buildings. What you also see in many countries is the evolution and devolution of the department store. It's now an outdated model. So the Vroom and Dreesman department store, as it has shrinking, actually saw a devolution and a deconstruction of part of it into a new shopping arcade designed by Bernard Schumi in 2014. And ultimately in 2014 and after 2014, it's complete bankruptcy. So we see a consolidation of buildings. Vroom and Dreesman, by the way, is this turquoise set of buildings in the middle, completely gone, leading to a consolidation, decreased contract between buildings and public space, what architect Kim Dovey calls density without intensity, and ultimately its collapse. I hope we can talk about that. Very quickly, I want to talk to you about this second phenomenon that I wanted to discuss is introversion. So we go to another district in The Hague, a former canal district. Your Noli plan on the left, very fine-grained 6-7 meter wide buildings with a mixture of retail, industry, manufacturing, warehousing on the ground floor, your typical happy horse cart on the right-hand side. And the complete deconstruction of this district for an office district for national government offices, The Hague is the government capital of the Netherlands, between the 19-teens and the 1960s, leading to the near complete demolition of the district in the 1960s. Mind you, this Noli plan is of the same area of the 19-teens as well. The construction of highly secured ministry office buildings with hardly any entrances to public space, hardly any interaction with public space, leading to a massive devaluation of the street. The street that you see over here is a fully pedestrianized street, perhaps best practice in terms of street design, but I hope you can realize that this is a very lousy street to walk along because of the architecture alongside. Luckily, The Hague saw the light at some point and said, we will again flip these office buildings into a new interaction with the street. This very same building that you saw in my previous slide has now been turned into residences with retail on the ground floor, connecting to public space. Again, it's still a pedestrian street, but a much more lively one with patios as well. What I quickly want to show you, though, is that over this 100-year period of time, you've seen a 96% reduction in entrances per square foot or per square meter of floor space. So yes, we have gotten more interactive, right? There's more interesting things to do, but you still see that only 4% of the original 1915 entrances are left. So a complete deterioration of the relation between buildings and public space. Very quickly, in the last minute that I have, what do we do, right? How do we reconnect these buildings? This is the topic of a book that I'm publishing together with STIPO leader Hans Karsenberg very soon. Couple of quick lessons in the conclusion of that book is, you know, these interactive frontages, you can regulate for them, you can design, they really only thrive in the right ecosystem. When I say ecosystem, I mean social, economic, cultural ecosystem. Critical mass absolutely matters in this. They only thrive at the right critical mass. Commercial design, retail design, fair enough, benefits businesses, neighbors, and the city. But very, very importantly, there is life beyond street level commerce. There's life beyond retail that we absolutely need to take care of, and which is very much the topic of future research. And living at eye level, which is residential living at eye level, can also very much enrich the life of cities and citizens. So plugging the book here, it's not out yet. You know, make me 25 cents per book, please. And I look forward to discussing the book and my research with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Conrad. Very interesting to see the evolution of just a few cases and the shocking, of course, change that can happen in cities. And of course, then it's the question always, is this everywhere like this or not? Because you have all kinds of specificities on thing. But definitely, it's really interesting to think about the ground floor, but also the use of it in we come back on that in the questions in the debate. Thank you, Conrad. Andrea, it's your turn. Please share us your thoughts and your presentation.
Okay, so good morning, Conrad. Good afternoon to everybody that is in Portugal. First of all, thanks for the invitation to the Casas Valle and Oliveira. It's a pleasure to be here and learning not just with Vitor and Conrad, but also talking about learning from the past. I bring some ideas for us to discuss. The first has to do with the problematic of shaping cities. Whenever one thinks about how the future is likely to evolve, it all comes down to what's going to happen in the cities. Not only because a growing share of world's population, by far the majority of the population lives in city, but also in cities, but also because they are the source of energy. They are dynamic. It's the ecosystem of cities, the ideas, the inventions, and the energy that comes out of the cities. They will determine whether this is the best century of humanity or whether we have a rather calamitous one. That's all going to be shaped by cities and in turn will shape cities. So first and foremost is the question of how the ecosystem of cities evolve. How do buildings, people, humanities, and commerce interact in a way that makes them livable, that makes them the place that people want to be in and drive? As a result of the pandemic that is now being challenged more severely than has been at any time since the Second World War, the question is, can we do it better? So to talk about the city or street design, it's the best to first explain the terms in which we need to address something in order to then verify if we are able to do better or not. Even though I had to learn the different languages of economics, politics, social movement, and environmental. We enter this question as designers, not as a humanitarian or a politician. In the end, what we do is translate all those forces into form. Therefore, the question is about what informs the form. It's also important to talk about movement towards cities. Never before in history of humanity, we have seen this movement towards cities. Cities are incredibly powerful tools to produce wealth, but also efficient and distributing the quality of life through public policy. The problem is that we are currently threatened by scale, speed, and scarcity. Expressed as such, we have to respond and accommodate the 1 million people per week that are currently moving to cities. These migration processes are happening in the poorest countries. If we don't solve this question, it's not that people will stop coming to the cities, they will come anyhow, but they will live in awful conditions. This is a professional challenge for an architect. It's about professional quality, not charity. The way around this, of course, is not just design. Design is a way to synthesize this very complex question. And the more complex the question, the more need for synthesis. At the very core of architecture, there's a very powerful tool, design. Without reducing the initial complexity of project, design picks up, identifies, prioritizes, and organizes it in a non-linear way. Historians are usually better at predicting the past than the future. I think crises are both. They are turning points, but they are also the way to reveal the extent of changes that have already begun. Today, we can point two visions for the future, considering the present. One is general, and the other one is influenced by the pandemic. Regarding the first, cities are not an accumulation of houses, but a concentration of extremely relevant and crucial opportunities, particularly for poor families. That's why people come to cities. They come looking for opportunities. It's not they want to live in bad conditions, but the cost of living in slums is lower than the benefit of the chance to assess a better life with jobs, education, healthcare, and so on. So if cities are all concentration of opportunities, then they should be measured by what you can do in them for free. The way to look at the city of the future then would be to look at the elements and components that are public goods. So what about to don't build? On the other hand, what makes more important for the city of the future is what we are not going to build. The open spaces, the public spaces, the width of the streets, as Vitor said before. This is connected to the pandemic, which has proven that open spaces and being able to be outdoors can become an antidote. The quality of public life will, in a way, be crucial with regard to the pandemic. Yes, we will still have to take measures, but our nature is gregarious. Our hardware is prehistoric. Our bodies haven't changed, emotional still move us. The prehistoric way of experiencing life will require us to build the place we need, or the places we need. I would hope that the city of the future might, in some ways, look like the city of the past. If we think about the narrower streets in the cities around the world, and even in my hometown, that actually is Guimarães, even if I live in Porto, going back to the simple aspects of city living that brought people together, allies and safe places for people to walk the city was less concentrated on parking and more about the experience of being able to interact with people, of getting to where you are going safely. Having trees is very important to quality of life, as well as to habit and cooling the incredibly warm world that we are moving into. As we have seen in the heat extremes in the Pacific Northwest, or stormwater management for the participation events made stronger in this area of climate change. Participation falls stronger than ever. For all of those proposed cities that have parks and green space for people and for creation are wonderful for also physically and mental health. But this could be an utopia. The utopia city in Africa or parts of Asia is different from the utopian remodeling of the European or North American city. Despite that, however, there are certain things in common. One is that for a city to work both environmental and socially, it has to be dense and compact. The notion of a never-ending, sprawling piece of urban infrastructure, which we have seen much of over the last 50 or 60 years, hasn't diminished. Saskia Sassen refers to the cityness, the ability to interact and to connect. In that sense, even the utopian city of the future is going to be about coming together to transact ideas, goods, and in many ways, money. I think the city of the future will therefore be closer and more compact, as I said before. It will have different forms and efficient transport where the geography change in terms of what technology may be available and affordable. It will be far more responsive to environmental issues than we have been in the past, and ultimately it will be fairer. In other words, the spatial planning itself, I hope, will try to avoid tendencies towards segregation and differences. We can't start thinking about the design of the cities of the future without completely connecting that to issues of social empowerment and environmental justice. they've got to be part of the same way of thinking. Unfortunately, even today, the tendency among environmental groups is not to take planning as a central issue, that everything depends on our eating habits, and other thing is true. However, as the climate economist Nick Stern says, we also know that it's in the cities where you can either make the problem worse or solve it. So many people in the world now live and will increasingly continue to live in cities over the next 30 and 40 years, reducing our environmental footprint by 10 or 20% can make a critical impact on the planetary equation, although the aspiration is obviously more than that. The environmental connection to the physically, and this has been absolutely highlighted with COVID-19 in the last 2 years or so, cities themselves can be mechanisms of deep inequality. It took a pandemic for us to suddenly wake up in whatever city we happen to live in and realize that underneath the surface, there are people who live below the breadline, even in some of the most advanced economies. Can we design environments that offer them opportunities, access to parks and to physical infrastructure, schools, social services, etc., so that they have more equitable life? So the idea to end my 10 minutes speech, can we see the value of the existence? For me, everything that exists is interesting. Above all, this is driven by the concept of inhabiting, which is the best key point of architecture. How can we produce the best living conditions? It's about the generosity of space. It's about the economy and transformation. Everything follows this. The transformation of the existing is also part of this concept strategy. To achieve those ambitions, we need to use all the tools we have. But I'm not sure that is special attitude with the past. It's more about caring for the present. On the other hand, we greatly care about the past, about the story. However, we live in the present, we build in the present. It is important to consider that when we talk about reuse, it's not just by respect for the past, although we, of course, do have that. So it's more about, for me, desire in the present. It's about doing the most we can do in the present. Maybe the question is what really means the public space. So, thank you.
Thank you, Andrea, for your contribution and a large spectrum on looking to cities, of course, but also on streets. Because today we are, of course, talking about the future design of streets. And so the coming 45 minutes, I would like to go with you together back to the question, what is the design assignment of streets for tomorrow? And what kind of concept or what kind of elements are essential to consider it? Well, I think, so the question is always what's next? What are we going to do? We are, as you said, Andrea, what is the best living condition for us of all? And of course, there are very, very different conditions of cities, urban areas, and it is not only physical form, of course, because we are interrelated with mobility, economical structure, ecosystems. So what is really important to look on it? Is it the 15-minute city, perhaps, that has this kind of proximity today? Is the ecological city? Is it the active city, the healthy city? There are a lot of concepts, let's say, on what to put on cities and what to frame on it. So how to do it? One of the things that you three mentioned in completely different context is scale up maybe, and how the speed of let's say, production of industrialization, came up also adapting in a way the urban form and adapting that form for the necessities. Conrad, I would like to start to ask you first on to reflect on the scale up, because you show two different areas in Den Haag, and I assume you have much more knowledge on other kind of areas in a way. Let's say, is the adaptation in a way always economical? Let's say, is that the motivation why the urban form is changed, or is it, or can we also see that we nowadays we rediscover that, let's say, that we can live and we can sell products in a lot of kind of forms in a way? What is, let's say, the changing in thinking about form as a value for the city, but also for the streets and for the private area?
So I would essentially, as designers, plea for modesty and interdisciplinarity. So a lot of what I showed you is outside of the hands of traditional designers. What I mean to say with that is most of what I showed you are changes in technology that are not necessarily done by architects, changing in business practices, changing in production, and changes in consumption, changes in organization. So the first set of blocks I showed you is a mixture of a change in technology and a change in production and consumption. The second set is a change in the organization of governance, you know, a central government needing a large office and then all of a sudden not needing a large office. We are constantly bombarded with things that are outside of our scope, and we need to respond and adapt to that. We can do that in several ways, but we also need not overstate our agency in that. So when we are asked to create a new national government office with a certain amount of square meters, we have to respond. When we are asked to create the large country, we have to respond. And of course, in various eras, we grasped it with both hands. But I think modesty comes with empowerment in understanding the forces that are shaping our cities. If we understand those better, we have more power to respond. And that understanding goes far beyond creating form and shaping cities. The scales are increasing. I can also tell you there's no going against that either. You can regulate all the scales that you want, but the scale of development in high pressure settings in centers of cities will increase. The question then becomes, how do you cope with that scale, right? So how do we regulate and leverage the scale? I don't want to fill the whole 45 minutes, but there are benefits to larger scale development as well. For example, there are benefits to making sure that the ground floors of buildings remain active with a decreasing number of, for instance, shops and cafes per person, which is very much in Western Europe and North America is the case. If you want to create active frontages, well, we need more people to fill those, right? We need more customers to fill those. Again, could be a benefit to scale as well. So design has to really listen, has to understand, and then come back and create the most, what I would call urbane architecture, the architecture that would support urban life the most. Not from a form shaping, but from a force guiding perspective. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Conrad, to reflect on that. Perhaps just a bridge to the Porto area, Victor. You showed us a slide with, let's say, a kind of fragmented urbanization, and next to it, a kind of 19th century building blocks in Porto, I guess it was. And you mentioned there that the fragmented area, so a fragmented urban form, let's say, was not very efficient for public transport. The question what I'd like to ask is, does urban form matters in the functionality how we use the territory. Is it the most efficient nowadays, maybe with an ecological sustainability look to it, or are there other issues? What do you think about that?
Your question can be broken into many questions. Well, when I showed that first map, and then the two Google images to make it more understandable, I really want to show two different ways of organizing the territory, or if you want, to organize the ground, not even the ground floor as Conrad, but the ground of our territory. And I think that this is very important, and this moment of decision, of very important decision, does not attract the attention of most architects, because they tend to be focused on designing buildings as special as possible. They are not attracted by common things. And the design of the ground is not something very, very attractive. I think that, and I started by these structural aspects, because I think that when we try, on the one hand, to solve some problems of our streets, or to make them better, is because some of them have born wrong, and we spend all our lives trying to do some arrangement here, arrangement there, because on their zero moment they were designed in this fragmented way. And this fragmentation started to be more and more evident over the last century, throughout the 20th century. So when you look at a map of the Porto metropolitan area, you see, and I forgot to mention, but there was a note in the bottom of it, the more red streets, the more red axes were more integrated axes, and those that were more close to blue, they were more segregated. And you noticed that there was a huge part of the metropolitan area of Porto, as of most metropolitan areas, that tends to follow this fragmented way of structuring, and all the other things come in as a sequence of this. So you have fragmented streets, you have large and large street blocks, you have large plots, and your buildings start to be detached from the street and to be detached from each other. So you have this pattern that, in terms of form, you can, in the end, it's a question of taste, of enjoying it. I don't enjoy it particularly, but you can enjoy it, and it's okay. I don't have very strong arguments in terms of aesthetic. What can be beautiful for me can be awful for you. But what matters to me is that this has an impact in many things. And getting back to your question, and to something that you have said before talking to Conrad, is that at least in my research, I have been finding that what is a negative impact of form on the social dimension, it's also on the economic and on the environmental. Meaning that, for instance, someone that lives in this pattern of urban form that I have just described, that it is poor usually faces a high number of obstacles in social and economics and in environmental terms. So there is a kind of cumulative effect, okay, in this coincidence between a particular type of urban form and a particular level of social diversity, of economic diversity, or of sustainability, of environmental sustainability. But as Conrad, I don't want to be here for the whole hour, so please.
Okay, thank you, Victor. I think we're getting also a little bit like in difficulty. Are we talking about generic things, or is it always specific? Because this let's say fragmentation of cities or diffuse city systems also has a lot of, let's say, difference in it. Like let's say the more compact cities, there's also a lot of differences, and also in time. I will remember, let's say, that in the city of Amsterdam, but also other kind of cities in the 80s, they were not done. Everybody was going to the suburb. So suddenly, because of safety, also form that is similar to Paris or to, let's say, to Porto or Den Haag, then suddenly is less attractive. So there's a kind of complexity in it. But thank you, Victor. I would like to ask Andrea, because you shoot a really classic image of the boards of Paris, and that is a kind of really inspiring in a way. But I would like to ask you. That is in Paris, of course. We know that Paris is a kind of compact city with city blocks. I think the ground level is. I like interesting, but also with the city scale. Do you think we need this form to use the city because the board has some kind of other perspective on it? How do you reflect on that?
Well, I rather prefer not to focus on a specific case study here. Just because I think
is, let's say, the board has some kind of reflecting on it, that you have, let's say, you can experience the city in different kind of ways. In a way, linearly, but in kind of what we would say now, in kind of sapping manner, in a way. So it was interesting. Is the concept behind it that you showed. Is that applicable, let's say, to the Porto city, or also the fragmentation of the city?
Right. The thing for me, I can contextualize the problem as a general problem, and the problem I call it, I don't know if it's the right word, a polarization. So I think we are living now in this, and I think we are going to be able to reduce this polarization in the future, or the question is, how will we come together precisely to find solutions to this, that for me is the biggest problems that we are faced ahead, right? So in terms of creating space to reduce this polarization, while at the same time create a debate or a discussion around what we really want to do together. In a proactive way, the more cities and design thinking architects, maybe designers, urban plannings can be central to this, to beat this polarization. So that for me is the world's question right now. I think I answered. Sorry, I cannot hear you.
I'm going to give you, thank you, Andrea. I'm going to give it back to Victor, because I was just tricking as well. You mentioned, Andrea, about creating spaces to, let's say, the polarization, or the spaces can matter in this sense. And Victor, you mentioned some streets were just born in a wrong manner. At the same time, there are a lot of streets that are there, that people live around them. how do you think we can create better places on this? Do you have any idea how to do it? Because at the end, if you go to the Porto region, there are probably more than 500,000 people living in this area, or even more.
But we will never know if they are satisfied with their streets. Well, I think that we have not, we could have done it, but we have not talked before this session started. But I think that our 3 presentations are very curious how they are related, because it starts with Andrea in a very high level, then it comes to me, and then it goes to Conrad. And of course, that because of that, you have seen some clues to your question on Conrad's presentation. For me, it's not, although I'm an architect, it's not about the specific qualities of building that are related to style or materials, but it is about those things that Conrad started to address. It is about how you relate your building, your ground floor. The most important thing is the ground floor, is what we see. Most of us, for sure, there are many buildings in our cities that we don't know how the first floor is, or the second, the third, but we know how the ground floor is. The most important contribution of buildings to street life. And that, I think that this is the kind of streets that we want. We don't want, I'm sure, to make all streets equal, but there is this minimum level of urbanity that we need in our streets. And buildings have kind of a duty to that. And it starts with the ground floor, it starts with the number of floors. For instance, I've showed one building in Matosinhos that is almost 200 meters long, and it doesn't have one single door. Okay? We can enjoy the building, but it doesn't have one single door. So its contribution to the city is none. So we have to work with these very simple and basic things that the common citizen understands, but sometimes we architects seem not to understand. What is your relation of the ground floor with the street? Do you have doors? Do you have windows, or is just walls that we are producing? What is the relation between the building height and the street height? It's absolutely different to have those kind of sections, or more open, or even more open, or as open that you don't feel the street and you don't have climatic comfort and you don't feel safe. So, but all these questions, and of course we can then go to the issue of trees, we can then go to the urban furniture that we place on the street, and we can go into a higher level of detail. But I think that starting from Conrad, it's a very good way to address the design of streets. And if we want to go back, please think about those things that I mentioned about the street system, how that particular street that you are redesigning is related to the others. How are the plots in the street blocks, and where do buildings stand? Because these are crucial issues for the design.
So Vitor, can I reply by?
Yeah, go ahead, Conrad.
By first thanking Andrea for a wonderful statement on polarization. So to me, in the conclusion of our book, the main currency of the relation between buildings and public space was trust, right? So it's not about form, it's not about the economy, it's about trust. I show pictures of shops that are very distrustful, and I show pictures of offices, which everyone hates, that are very trustful. I mean, the basic concept of a more lively street is that concept, let's call it, of heterotopia, right? So if you do not have basic trust between people in the city, what do you do? The reason I bring this up, because it sounds very esoteric, is that, of course, we have a role in enabling this trust. Again, here comes the role of the architect as being more modest, is creating the spatial affordances, right? The environmental psychology comes in here, the spatial affordance to allow people to trust one another. We essentially can almost only do it wrong. We can create spaces that do not allow people to trust one another, or we can create, as I said again, the affordance, the ability to allow people to trust one another. I also want to then clarify, right? So the ground floor buildings, people always say, oh, Conrad, you're talking about storefronts. No, I'm not, right? Because the number of shops is declining. We have to talk a much bigger perspective. We have to talk about people living on the ground floor, people working, people producing. And all of that comes down to, do I trust the city? I'm very, very grateful, Andrea, that you mentioned that. To be honest, living in a city now, I'm sure you've all seen the news on Buffalo, right? That has some trust issues, but also talking to people globally. So I had Vitor, our wonderful colleague, Geraldo Borges, coming over from Brazil. And he said, oh my God, he looked in Buffalo saying people really trust public space here. They really trust the streets. And if he would travel onward to Porto, he would say, oh man, people trust the city even more. And it directly translates not in the design form of the street and of the building, but in the inhabited form of the street and the building. Because as people inhabit the structures that we design and the streets we design, they'll shape it to whatever they want. And if they don't trust each other or they don't trust us, they'll show that. They will modify spaces. They will modify behaviors as well. So again, thank you so much for mentioning trust and polarization.
Thank you, Conrad. Andrea, do you want to reflect on that? Because at the end you brought up this concept here. How do you see that in the sense of, let's say, streets in Porto, Guimarães, where you are, do you know by heart?
By heart. Well, thanks for the comment and the highlight on the previous highlight. Maybe I will take that and I will have another kind of provocation on that. That is about the memory and the importance of the memory when we are talking about learning from the past, and our past maybe could be also recent past. And sometimes we talk about, for example, our childhood, and I will put myself in the same generation than all my panel colleagues here, but we remember for sure that our parents and grandparents were part of a generation that actually took care of what they have. And nowadays we are living this era of consumption. So this is almost the only thing that we know today. And of course, there is a kind of reflection on that kind of behavior in the cities, as the city is this mirror of the society. And as a child, I probably never noticed, but now I remember quite almost every single day this idea of permanent care, of giving many kind of lives to everything. So when we are talking about the cities and the ways the city or the streets are changing, sometimes is also this tricky question about actually what to actually build, rebuild, and just totally take out and leave it as empty space. And then we connect again the three presentations we saw here today. The green areas that Victor was talking before. He also mentioned something like connected with the scale of changing, but the presence of doors and the presence of the trees, and how it's important, the idea of caring, taking care of the memory, because as designers, we are changing memories once we draw something on the top of a pre-existing drawing. And this is, I think, the memory also legacy. It's something quite important in everything that we were talking about. So maybe it's when we are talking about in 2100 years, for example, so in just 80 years time, maybe the ideal of the streets will be something more largely silent, maybe, and then the sound memory of everything. So there are so many layers when we are talking about the future designs of the streets and thinking about the past, that even the sound is a legacy. So even the sound is a memory. Each one of us has memories to play in the cities, in the streets, and nowadays our children's, they cannot. So even that, so everything is changing so fast that we are, I would prefer to think about greener roofs and to talk about that, everything will be more green and so on. But maybe this is just an ambition, and I'm mixing a lot of things. I know I'm being provocative.
Maybe I'm just going to try to put it a little bit. Let's say I just remember that, of course, we faced always, all of us in a different way, the COVID period, and then suddenly you were walking in the streets of Porto in my case, and I could hear birds everywhere, what I never heard. And this is a kind of amazing thing that, of course, the birds were there. Probably there were a little bit more now. But because you didn't have cars and all the people, suddenly you had a kind of quality that you rediscovered here. And in other cities, you could see the Himalayas suddenly, or whatever. So this is even worse. And it says something about climate change and about sustainability and these things. And that's this, in a way, how we organize, let's say, the condition of urbanization does matter, and how we use it in a way. And it has with all these elements together. I would like to go to Conrad to a little bit provoke a little bit in the sense of what is really this learning thing about analyzing the transformation of 100 years, something like this, of pieces of city in the things. Can we say something about the do's and don't do's, or is it just a matter of, you know, kind of a good sense of things that, you know, what we learned from Yangel, from, you know, from the great American city, Jacobs. So you have many authors that already described in a way. Or can we really say something about the form? And because at the end, it's also a condition in how we organize things.
So I can start with the cliche, which is the only constant is change. Over 100 years period of time, I was shocked, absolutely shocked at the level of change. So Andrea, to get back to memory, how on earth do you build memory? The constant in this change is us, is form. So I essentially looked at the form of the city. I looked at the form of buildings, and then I looked one step further at the function of buildings. I did not show those maps, by the way. I just, you know, I didn't want to bore you too much, and buy the book, right? So the idea is, of course, and as all of you know, and Vitor definitely knows, is there's rates of change, right? So there's the rate of change of the urban fabric, that's the slowest, the buildings, but oh my God, the rate of change of the function of a building is absolutely insane. However, there are some constants in there as well, and you do see patterns. That's why probably one of the most significant things I found is that critical mass. You have an ecosystem of a fine-grained relationship between a building and a street, which tends to relate to a street that is vibrant. Once you mess with that, it dies, and it dies in rapid succession. It kills off, spiraling downward. So one of the things to do and don't is, if you want to have a close-grained relationship between the building and the street, at the top level, retail, fine, but even living or production, is to do that at a critical mass. You cannot introduce 3 little fine-grained buildings in Vitor's awful suburb. It's not going to work. At a certain scale, this, of course, has been done by shopping mall designers. Why is a shopping mall on the inside so walkable and cute and small? Yeah, it's a critical mass of commerce. There's all sorts of economic theories behind that. There's all sorts of psychological theories behind this. You can also do this for a residential street. To grow trust, you cannot have just 3 neighbors knowing one another. No, you need a certain, let's call settlement size. And by the way, a lot of what I say has been proven by structuralist architects in the 60s and 70s. They really were interested in how people inhabit the city and how they relate to one another. It's quite a interesting period, 60s, 70s, 80s, between sociology, architecture, and psychology, of how do we create these ecosystems of trust and ecosystems of vibrancy. Again, main lesson I found, once you mess with that ecosystem, it dies off. If you want to build that from nothing, say in Vitor in the suburbs in Porto, you actually have to go big. You cannot be very incremental about that. You have to design a settlement at a certain mass to reinstate that. That's probably the main thing I can tell you for a 100-year period of time.
Well, that's very good. Just one question: does property play a role in this?
It does and it doesn't, mostly because it's outside of our control. So yes, in all of these cases, you have 500 property owners, and then all of a sudden you have 2. Danielle, to challenge your notion of the sustainable city, I'm going to be a chauvinist Dutchman. We have 2 words for sustainability. We have sustainable and the durable city. I very much prefer the term the durable city, which is a city that is resilient. Partially because I feel that sustainability is abused as a term quite often, but to me, the most sustainable city is a city that can withstand some shocks. The real issue that you find in the 2 sort of sets of blocks I showed you is the resilience goes down, because all of a sudden you have 1 or 2 property owners, and 1 or 2 of these owners fails, you have a problem. So I'm telling you that this fine-grained ecosystem falls apart, but also the resilience of the system declines. It becomes very dangerous. I could have shown you the American counterpart of The Hague, where the department store went bankrupt and left a giant hole in the middle of the city for decades. And now the entire picture is bought up by 1 single person that recently had a brain hemorrhage. So if the guy would have died, the entire picture would have been owned by no one, essentially, by no organization.
Right. Yeah.
So it has pros and cons as well.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Well, we are going ending. We are starting to have 15 minutes at the end. So I would like to ask maybe Andrea, because you mentioned a lot of things. So, but also about. You mentioned somehow that for you, the city, a livable city in a way, it's also a walkable city with less parking. How do you see that in, let's say, in the coming future, how we can improve cities?
Well, we are talking about mobility trends now. I think so. Some of the trends that we are seeing in mobility to prospect this, I think is the right word is the driverless vehicles platooning, right? Platooning, densely consuming far less road space, also have the power to, of course, transform, for example, the suburbia. And this is possible, but mostly all of the questions we are talking also here are connected by the idea of regulation, and how important is to that all this is somehow part of some rules that policies are taking, care of. So the ones who actually are in power, the ones who decided that this is part of. So I think this won't just happen in response to the market, these mobility trends. You could even talk about multi-central regions with hubs of centrality around them, where this technology would make the difference for sure. But the physical structure, however, needs to allow that to happen. So maybe we are talking about also new typologies, or even rethink the typologies, the pre-existing typologies. So if you have one home every 300 meters with a very large garden, of course, some kind of the strategies we are here talking about, they couldn't be thinking in for these kind of systems we are going to work. So even when we are talking about streets of the cities, probably, and even if we are going to a smaller city scale, maybe some of the questions are already needed to be readjusted. So I think maybe we, in other words, to special planning itself, we should try to, as I said in my presentation, avoid some of the tendencies, and some of us in some periods of our activities are in power actually to decide those rules, to decide what can be the new regulations, and those are the ones who actually decide. And of course, we are always here talking about this environmental justice at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Just city in a way, social inclusivity. Regulations, yeah, it's if you talk about a regulation and you open a book that you never end, of course, because it's always a kind of never ending. Victor, a little bit to you, because you mentioned in a way the importance of designing good, let's say, ground level things, and you mentioned also that there is perhaps not that architects should do that better in a way, if I understood it good. How do you think we can work on that to improve that skills to make, let's say, good, decent housing on the street or other kind of buildings?
Well, I think that this goes back to your former question to Conrad of what to do and not to do, and who should do what. I think that the answer for your question should start on planning. When you design a plan, you aim at prepare the future, and you select what you want to control and what you don't want to control, because many ideas can be better than yours. So I think that when designing a plan, you should be really selective on the aspects that you think must happen. And I think that in this list, it comes the issue of the ground floor. So planning must have something to say about that. Very simple rules, not elaborated. Well, your thoughts can be elaborated, but the rules should be easy to be understood.
Mm-hmm.
This is the first part of my answer. The second part is when it comes to architects. We are trained, most of us were trained in different schools. All of us come from different schools. But I think that one strong focus of our education is to be creative, to be innovative, to explore what no one has explored before in architectural form. And that is okay, but we also have to follow some common sense and some and be. I think that Conrad used the word modest or humble to learn from the past and to learn from the things that are happening in the same street where you are. I live in a 19th century street. I have designed my building. It's a contemporary building. But I tried to learn the lessons from all the other, I think it's 150 buildings that exist in this street. And the ground floor of those buildings that were erected until a certain part of the 20th century were always very well solved. This relation between public and private, how high should be your ground floor level in relation to the street in order to have some privacy, but not to be isolated from the street. These were very sensible things that I don't know how we have lost and that we should recover. So, so this would be the two parts of my answer to your question, the things that should be provided by planning and the things that we must improve in our architectural practice.
Thank you, Victor. In a way, you see there is some kind of, let's say, dialogue between, in a way, kind of simple, let's say, clear rules, so that, let's say, we can create a collective structure together with different kind of, let's say, private areas or private ownerships. But at the same time, and I like that very much, if you say it's also about really sensible things. The micro scale does matter in a way, but don't regulate that. But be there keen in that is also a contribution how the street works and how, let's say, the relation between the private and the public works in a way. I think, Conrad, you mentioned in the beginning, I don't know, also something about the ground floor area is in kind of in between the disciplines. Is this discussion that we had just Victor mentioned now, that is appealing in a way, the same at that thought, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So plus I want to add, there are the professionals, the urban designers, the traffic engineers, the architects, and then there are the end users. And I think, Vitor, part of what we see and why we appreciate the past is we see inhabited and optimized construction already. These are buildings that have gone through 100 years, 200 years of optimization as well. They are suited to fit. What I find a fascinating question in architecture is we we know what we want, all right? So there's not much disagreement on what is a good street or what is a good ground floor. What fascinates me is, why do we not create that? Why are we unable to create that? Why do we need regulation to tell someone else to do that? Because in a sense, what I'm saying is highly democratic, right? So it's people inhabiting a space. So technically you should be able to say, look, if we walk away, everything will be perfect. Humble also comes from saying, I'm not blaming architects for our lousy ground floors or our lousy architecture. There's other forces at play. So perhaps the other thing I want to say is, the larger forces at play tend not to be architecture. Capital accumulation, essentially very large plots, suburbanization, fragmentation, AV technology, Andrea, for which I hold very, very low hopes as well, are essentially forced upon what I call a continuum of the durable city, a small scale, trustful inhabitation of the city that is inherently human and has not changed that much over the past millennium either, right? So it's dealing with these external forces and safeguarding the continuum of the just, walkable, durable, whatever you want to call it, city.
Thank you, Conrad. It's in a real reflecting comments that you said, and also the question why it doesn't happen, you know, and why at the end it's a complexity of a lot of forces, etc. So yeah, thank you for your reflection on this. I see that we are also at the end of the time, so it is going fast, always these things, and there's probably a lot of more things to say, to comment, to show with each other. So I would like really to thank you very much, three of you, for your participation in this webinar and showing your, let's say, beautiful insight and thoughts with us. Hope we can get in touch with each other from the coming weeks, years, because we are going strong. We are not having here the last session, but next year we are going to have the 4th edition already for the future design of streets, creating and continues with this project, and being open source and connecting different kind of people from mainly Europe with different kind of disciplines, backgrounds, different kind of cities, and sometimes people from on the other side of the world as well, having conversations. So thank you very much for now. I would like to ask thanks very much to the audience, of course, being with us. Some of them quite a long time with a lot of sessions, some only this. So I hope you liked it, you got inspired, and we can see each other further. I would also like to thank very much my team on this, because I'm not doing this alone. So I would like to ask thanks Ivo, Bruno, Teresa, João, that are working with us in the back side with this on the content, on the technical issues. Thank you very much for your contribution, and of course the support of the universities. And I have just one announcement to say and to end this session, because we are going to have a conference this year in Porto or nearby Porto. The program, we are working on it, and it will be in 18th of November 2022. So this year, in a kind of half year in Porto. We serve the day, and we, if you subscribed in the platform, you are getting a newsletter from us soon to announce the program. So welcome everybody in Porto or elsewhere. I like this very much with your session, and I would like to thank everybody and have a nice evening or day still. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.